You ever watch a movie from back in the day that you had forgot about, had a couple of good liners, you're like, man, this movie's really good. How did I forget about this? There's a handful of players that us as a fantasy community are forgetting about. Let's talk about it. Let's go. So first, I want to talk about Cooper Kupp. Now, I know you might be thinking, how was a top 5 pick someone that's being forgotten about? How could he be underrated? How could he be flying under the radar? Well, let's talk about it. Last year, Cooper Kupp finished as the wide receiver 23, and that was just in 9 games. Let's put that in perspective. He finished as a wide receiver 2 in 9 games. He played half the season, and he was a wide receiver 2. He finished the year with 75 catches, 812 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He even threw in a couple rushes. He had 9 rushes for 52 yards and a touchdown. So they were just really getting him the ball in all areas of the field. In those 9 games, he averaged about 10 targets, 8 catches, 90 yards, and had 6 touchdowns in those 9 games. So let's extrapolate that throughout a 17-game season. He was on pace for 170 targets, 136 catches, over 1,500 yards, and 11 touchdowns. Everyone obviously knows Justin Jefferson had a really good year. He was the number 1 receiver in fantasy, and obviously right now he's in consideration for the number 1 pick in 2023. Last year, Justin Jefferson finished with 354 fantasy points and was the number 1 wide receiver. Let's take the extrapolation for Cooper Kupp in a 17-game pace and figure out what he would have been. He had 136 catches, 1,550 yards, and 11 touchdowns. That's for a 17-game pace. Can you guess how many fantasy points that would have been? 355. He would have been the number 1 receiver had he played the entire year. And he's not even in consideration for the number 1 pick. Why? A top 5 pick for Cooper Kupp is too low for me. He should be in consideration as the number 1 receiver. He should fly past Jamar Chase, and he could be in consideration with Justin Jefferson. They have no one on the depth chart to compete with targets for him. Odell's gone. Robert Woods is gone. He has no one to compete with. He's still Matthew Stafford's best friend, who is coming back from injury himself. So we have a healthy Matt Stafford with a healthy Cooper Kupp. We've seen him come back from injuries before, so I'm not really worried about that. I think that a top 5 pick for Cooper Kupp is too low. Now let's talk about Alvin Kamara. Last year, finished as the RB16, which was a down year for him. He played 15 games. Right now, he's being drafted as the RB28. Now, obviously, that matters because of the suspension. If he gets suspended, that's gonna, go way up. If he doesn't get suspended, his ADP is going to come way down. So I'm going to do this analysis based off of a 0-game suspension. He might get fined. He might have 1 or 2 games, but I'm doing this based off of a 0-game suspension, right? So like I said, he had a down year last year. He had 4 touchdowns. He had 2 receiving, 2 rushing. Throughout his career, he averages about 13 touchdowns a year based off of, receiving numbers and rushing numbers. So he obviously had a down year. So if those touchdown progressions goes up, if he swings the pendulum just a little bit, instead of getting 4 touchdowns and averaging 13, if he got maybe, 8 or 9, he's a top 10 running back. Derek Carr is on the New Orleans Saints this year. They no longer have Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton. Being a Raiders fan all the years and watching Derek Carr, I know that the running back position is very important to Derek Carr. He's a check down king. Last year, he threw the check down at a 9.5%, which was 3rd in the NFL. Since he came into the league, he's been top 5 in check down percentage. So Alvin Kamara is going to get anywhere between 75 to 90 catches, which is on his pace for his, average. If he gets anywhere between 75 and 90 catches, he's going to dominate for fantasy football, and he's going to be a steal for you wherever he's picked at. He should be a first-round pick if there's no suspension. If it's 1 or 2 games, I think that you can get away with him going in maybe the 3rd or 4th round, but I think we're forgetting how good Alvin Kamara really is. And this year, he's going to remind us. Let's talk about Joe Mixon. Last year, he finished as the RB10. Right now, he's being drafted as the RB15. Everything has gone in his favor this offseason. He's being pushed down the running back ranks. I have no idea why. 2020, Joe Burrow came into the league. He got hurt, so did Joe Mixon, so we're going to throw that year out. But last year, in 2021, he finishes the RB3. 2022, if you extrapolate his games as a 17-game pace, he would have been the RB6. So over the last few years, ever since Joe Burrow came into the league, Joe Mixon has been a top 6 running back. Let's just call it what it is. He's not the flashiest, he's not the fastest, he's not the strongest, but he gives you overall production. He's the number 1 running back. He gives you a workhorse role, and he's in a top offense. What else more can you want in fantasy football? Last year, on a 17-game pace, he would have got 72 catches, over 500 yards, and a couple touchdowns. Samaje Perine, who was on the team last year, is now gone. So you're talking about over 700 yards of total offense, 6 touchdowns, and almost 40 catches that's gone. So he was on pace for 70-plus receptions last year, and you're talking about 40 targets gone, 700 total yards gone. And he's being pushed down the RB ranks. He finishes the RB10. He's being drafted as the RB15 right now. I think we're forgetting how good Joe Mixon is. There's no one on the depth chart to challenge him. He was supposed to be suspended. He didn't. He was supposed to be cut. He wasn't. He was supposed to be traded. He hasn't. So why are we letting Joe Mixon slide to the RB15? I'm not complaining. I'll grab him in every fantasy draft. He's a lock for 250 attempts, over 70 targets, and the goal line work. Let's not forget about Joe Mixon this year. And last but not least, I want to talk about Cam Akers. Cam Akers finishes the RB35, which in retrospect doesn't look like that good of a year, but he finished strong and that's what matters. Right now he's being drafted as the RB24, which in my mind is pretty low. He didn't become the workhorse until week 11, once Darrell Williams got traded and they decided to roll with Cam Akers in that offense. In the month of December and January, which is about 6 games, he averaged about 17 attempts, 85 yards, and had 6 touchdowns in those 6 games, which is a 17-game pace for almost 300 attempts, over 1,400 yards, and 17 touchdowns. Now, do I think that Cam Akers is going to have 1,400 yards rushing and 17 touchdowns? No. But my point is they're using him in the workhorse role, and we're completely forgetting about that. Once again, just like I said with Cooper Kupp, the offense is going to be a lot better this year. They have no one to really, take targets away from Cooper Kupp. What Josh Jacobs and Devontae Adams was last year is going to be what Cam Akers and Cooper Kupp is going to be this year. Write that down. Now, like I said, 1,400 yards, 17 touchdowns, that would have been the RB1. I'm not saying draft Cam Akers as the RB1 this year, and I'm not saying he's going to be the RB1 this year, but I do think he's going to be a RB1 this year. He's going to be top 12. He's being drafted outside the top 20 running backs. Now, I'm not saying, once again, grab him in the first round, even really the second round. Let Cam Akers fall to you and grab him at value. So just remember, don't forget about these 4 players. Thanks for tuning in to today's video. Remember, subscribe to see more content from me and everyone here at Just in Time Media.